have a story about my grandfather. It doesn't have as much of a moral as the previous two stories have had, but in a way I think the story is very similar to Riley's, which was very interesting. My heritage ethnically is Norwegian. And there's something about an internal reserve of these Nordic people. They are very silent, they tend not to speak a lot. There's a metaphor that could be drawn between the climate, which demands that you stay inside, and a sort of unwillingness to go outside of oneself in speech, to hold oneself, as it were, in your own house. And my grandfather is like this, but not nearly as much as his own father. And I have two interconnected stories about ways this manifests both funny and hilariously. One day my grandfather was in college and his roommate wanted to see a girlfriend who lived 300 miles away. But it was about 11 o'clock on a Friday night, and they decided, well, whatever, let's go drive. And so they got in the car, and my grandfather put on his nice blue suede shoes, very handsome shoes, and they drove 300 or so miles. About halfway through, his friend, reckless, young, and very foolish, took a turn too fast, and the car flipped over off the road, and they were both ejected from the car. And having been thrown 60 feet into some farm in Iowa, they laid and waited. And some emergency services came and took them to the hospital, and it turned out that they were not killed, they survived, despite the seriousness of the wreck. And my grandfather, at a certain point, I think perhaps late that night or early next morning, he calls his own father and he says, listen, I've been in a serious accident. And his father says, have you called the insurance company yet? I said, Dad, I wasn't driving. He said, yeah, you still got to call the company. Dad, it wasn't my car. Oh, okay. So you're all right. And he was all right. A month later, he went home, a few days later he got out, and a month later, the state trooper knocks on his door, and he says, are you John Deardahl? I said, yeah, I am. And he pulls out a blue suede shoe and he says, is this yours? Turns out he had lost his shoes in the accident, and the state trooper brought it back for him. This same man, my great-grandfather, my grandfather's father, many years later had a very close encounter with death himself. He had a heart attack while he was working as a pharmacist, and he got to the hospital late at night, and my grandfather came to stay with him all night, about 12 hours. He was unconscious for that time. And early in the morning, or sometime in the morning in any case, he wakes up and he looks at my grandfather, and in the weakest possible voice he says, that was nearly it, wasn't it? And my grandfather looks at him and nods and says yes. And then his father turns back and looks at him and says, of course I saved my own life by taking nitroglycerin. And it's true. He did. He put it under his tongue, and it saved him from dying from the heart attack.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. And I don't want to draw anything further because I think in light of the previous two stories already, there's enough connections to be made. Interesting men.